A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. PolitiCoast, the Star Wars Holiday Special.
I'm Scott.
I'm Ian, and today we're joined by...
I'm Joe Fulgham.
For the quietest week in politics this year, we're dusting off an idea we had pretty much right at the start when we were brainstorming about this podcast, about a special episode about the politics and strategies of the Star Wars universe. And maybe in the future we'll do other fictional, let's say historic, universes.
It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Exactly.
It's history.
But before that, we have to do our usual fillers, reminding people to subscribe, leave a review where they found us, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, where we're at PolitiCoastPod, and of course, support the show at patreon.com/PolitiCoast. I also have to give a quick shout out to our premier sponsors, Lindsay Teds and Blake Hodson, for helping make this show possible. And just a pre-warning that we're going to have spoilers for every Star Wars movie up to and including The Last Jedi. But before we jump into that, Joe, who are you?
Well, I guess what I should do is talk about the podcast that I do, because I'm also a podcaster. I have a podcast called The Dreaming, the Sandman Read-Along podcast, where we go one issue of the classic Neil Gaiman comic book series, The Sandman, at a time, and just go through all the research with that and talk about things that we've learned and things that might happen, because my co-host has actually not read that comic until just before we record. I have another podcast called Enlightened, and that one is more about things that you can learn online and things that I have learned online. I like to have smart people come on and tell me things because I'm half smart, and edit that up and put it online. You can check those out. They're all on all the regular places, onlighten.com, and The Dreaming is at thedreaming.motivedust.com.
And you have a long and extensive pop culture history and knowledge, which is why I wanted to have you in on this conversation.
Yeah, I have been a giant nerd my entire life. The first Star Wars came out when I think I was 9 years old, so it was aimed squarely at me. My friends and I have been Star Wars nerds our entire lives. I've been role-playing Star Wars and all sorts of role-playing games and things like that. So yeah, I've had my ups and downs with my fandom as well. Kind of lost me there after the prequels, but I'm back fully in their grip now.
With that, and talking about the latest, what did we all think of The Last Jedi, since it only came out a couple weeks ago?
I loved it. I've seen it twice now, and I think every time, the second time I watched it made me love it even more. Like the things that bothered me the first time, which were mostly how long it was, because I did have to actually leave to go to the bathroom just as they got to Salt Planet. I was like, this is probably a slow time. I had to go. Other than that, man, I loved every decision they made. I love the changes that they made. I love the additions that they made. All so good.
A lot of it was a sort of reset button in a way. Just, oh, you thought you knew Star Wars. Well, we were getting too self-obsessed with the same family. Let's open it up. Let's have some fun. And
yeah, that's one of those decisions that I thought was fantastic. Yes, more. Yes.
Yeah, the sudden change up to the plot line in the second act of the movie was great and unexpected, and yeah, I think really helped the movie along and played to its strengths. Where it did feel a little flat was the Canto Bight section, which just dragged on a little too long, and the escape chase scene felt slightly too prequelish to me.
Yeah.
And I'd really love someone to re-edit this, take out that chase scene, a few other things, pare it down just slightly. I think you'd get a much tighter and better movie out of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a valid criticism.
Well, and what I enjoyed about that entire scene was we finally got to see the 1% of the Star Wars universe. Even the prequels, when we went to Coruscant, other than the Senate, we were basically in like the underbelly and we were in the dark areas, and we're like, oh, is everyone in this galaxy poor? Like,
Where's all the money?
Where's all the money? And it's in this one Canto Bight small saloon where people are just gambling and having a good time and selling arms to every which side, apparently.
Yeah.
Which is a nice little social commentary to add in there, just about the nature of war. And
so good. So good.
And of course, killing off the Jedi history and going, all right, you're the last Jedi. The Jedi got a little too big for their britches. Does fill in and make the prequels feel a little bit more like, okay, we are seeing how shitty the Jedi were.
Yeah.
And now there's a conclusion to that. Because they were this weird paramilitary force, and we'll get into this in a bit, but just trying to do their own thing, but beside the government. Like, they didn't really account to anyone. And so they were just this like religious warrior sect that hung around.
Yeah, and tried not to do anything.
Yeah.
Which is really weird.
So killing them off and letting it find a new balance to the Force, I think, would be a nice step for the next movie.
And the line, Jedi don't have a monopoly on the Force, I think was very key to me, which is we're going to see, and also, okay, so Last Jedi spoilers, when Leia kind of reflexively saved her own life after being blown into space, pull my suspenders of disbelief a little bit, but I'm fine with it because, moms lift up cars when their kids are in them. She magically pulls herself into the ship. That's fine. But I think we're going to see a lot more like non-Jedi Force users. I think we're going to open up and let this world have a little bit more kind of... The Force is really magic. I say this a lot. Star Wars is fantasy with sci-fi clothing. It's not really a science fiction story. And so we're going to see more of this magic by different types of Force users. We're going to see all sorts of stuff.
Only other thing I'd add is, I thought the Poe's arc was really good in it too. Having to learn how to command and not be an impulsive hothead.
Yeah, the general, we talked about this before we started, of the plans being, we'll have a war and then we'll send a plucky band of, upstarts to go do this one special thing. And generally that's a terrible idea. And in The Last Jedi, it was a terrible idea over and over and over again until he finally got to realize that and learned and grew. Poe actually got an arc. The amazing pilot who seems to never be able to do any wrong and is a wonderful guy everybody loves, got to fail hard and learn from it. I loved
several times.
Yes. Oh, and it made me remember. I was remembering the line from Hamilton with George Washington talking about his first command. He lost a lot of people. He learned from that. That's how he got to fight in that asymmetrical warfare against England. He learned, hey, you got to keep your people alive and stop thinking you're great. Loved it.
Well, let's go back before the Resistance, back before the First Order, back even before the original trilogy, to the Republic, the Galactic Republic. We're not going all the way back to the Old Republic. For the purposes of this discussion, because there's so much Star Wars content out there, and I read tons of those shitty novels and some decent novels as a child, and then they all got burned up by Disney when they bought out Star Wars. I think let's try and close ourselves in on what is considered canon. Otherwise, we get lost in the conflicting narratives. And I think when Disney called it canon, they said we're going to use the original 6 movies, the prequels and the original trilogy, and the Star Wars Clone Wars series. Though I haven't watched all of that. I think I've seen a few episodes. And I think there was the Clone Wars movie that I have on my shelf that I'm not sure I've made it through. But not much happens in those.
Clone Wars is really uneven, the TV Clone Wars, but there's a few really good episodes in there.
And then since then, they've added in the new movies, Last Jedi, Rogue One.
And Star Wars Rebels is canon as well.
Star Wars Force Awakens. And a few comic books that fill in some of Poe Dameron's backstory and some of the 30-odd years between Battle of Endor and Force Awakens. What I liked about Star Wars as a kid, and what I even enjoy still, even with the prequels, is a lot of what I think will frame our discussion around politics in Star Wars is most of it's all just one throwaway line.
Yeah.
When I first saw A New Hope, there's a line at the start where I think Tarkin walks in and goes, "The Empire just dissolved the Imperial Senate. The Grand Moffs have all the power now." That's the only reference to the Senate for 40 years until the prequels come out. So in episode 1, 2, and sort of into 3, we see the Republic at its supposed heyday, or even just on the edge of decline. We see this massive Senate of the planets, which is never fully explained as far as I can tell. They've also called it the Congress of the Republic, because Senate and Congress, just like in the US, are interchangeable words.
Sure.
And I'm not clear how it works, and it's never really been explained whether it's a one representative per planet system, because they do say Amidala in episode 2 is the senator for Naboo by that point, and she was asked to do it by the elected queen. Elected queen's also a weird thing, but Naboo can do Naboo. So in that way, it sounds like they're appointed, but there's another throwaway line where Obi-Wan's bitching about how politicians are terrible, and he's like, they're all just chasing campaign finance donations. And I'm like, well, if they're not running for election because they're just getting appointed by their home planet.
Yeah.
So there's some things that probably just are...
I blame George Lucas.
Probably.
That's really, I think, not having the idea in his head about how it works. Like, it's just if he wants a character to complain about politicians, that's what he gets to write in there. Oh, I guess that's how it works. I did try to look that up because I remembered in the notes seeing it. There is one main senator from a planet, or actually a sector, but they have multiple junior senators underneath them. And sometimes they're called ambassadors.
Just however.
Because Palpatine is an ambassador from Naboo. They call him Ambassador Palpatine.
Yeah, and they also, the original trilogy uses it when Vader asks, well, if this is a counselorship, where's the ambassador?
Right. So we could say maybe they're not actually speaking English and these are just bad translations. Queen, princess, that's not the actual words.
And the other thing to add in as we are jumping in more and more is Wikipedia, the Star Wars fan site, is the resource to just turn to, especially in the latter half when we start backfilling where the New Republic structure comes from and why it failed. Mm-hmm. So to me, the Senate of the Republic looks kind of like the UN in that it's not very effectual. It's trying to govern the world or the galaxy. Mm-hmm. There's representatives from very countering countries. There's no political affiliations at that level. There's no political parties in the Senate.
Yeah.
Although
they use a confidence motion very similar to kind of a Westminster model, which also didn't evolve with parties, but more or less requires them to work now.
Although they also mention at one point when Amidala is senator that she's the leader of the opposition, which implies there's parties. But that was probably another George Lucas garbage line.
Opposition, I think, means she voted no to a few things. I don't know.
She was opposition when the other person from her planet, Palpatine, is now chancellor.
I guess so, yeah.
But you can be elected chancellor and then you get a new senator, I guess. So that's fine.
Yeah, it seems to work more kind of on an informal caucus model almost, where people just group together as needed more than formal parties.
Yeah, and then occasionally they all sit in their big round floating things and shout at each other.
Yeah, you have thousands of people, so you need some way to come in. Structurally, it works a bit better than the Westminster two lines, people yelling at each other. It's a bit more like the European Parliament is actually a rounded structure. So you have people sitting all facing in a semicircle, essentially, with rows. But there they have political parties. And so you can group together your national labor parties versus your national conservative parties all sit together.
Yeah. If I recall, everybody's on floating platforms, aren't they? Because don't the platforms move up when people need to talk? So you can be like, let's group everybody by hair color today.
Yeah. But I do think it's more United Nations than like European Parliament or any of the more effective democracies, because we see just in the first 2 or 3 movies, Amidala comes and tries to make her case that the Trade Federation's attacking our planet, do something. And Trade Federation's like, actually, let's send a task force and see. and then some other random planet's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't we form a committee? And it's like, this is why stuff doesn't get done.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when you have millions of planets, I guess is what the galaxy has in it. When you have millions of planets, getting everybody together to agree on something is very, very complicated and difficult.
And that's what political parties are good for, is then you have at least some ideological alignment among people. So you can go, all right, we have 4 different groups maybe, and this group is the largest, which means it represents the most people. Now there's disagreement within each of those groups, but it's less than between them.
Right.
And that way you can try to either get this group and another group to form a majority and vote something through, versus when you don't and you're just everyone's voting en masse and en bloc. It doesn't tend to work. I think I am stuck on this for a bit because there was some article, probably on Vox, about why the Senate in the Republic needs political parties, and that would have fixed a lot of things. So there's the lack of the political parties. There's the general just getting stuck on trivial matters. And apparently when you come and make your case, Amidala forgot to bring evidence of the trade blockade.
Yeah.
But that's
her smartphone out when she was leaving the planet.
She had R2-D2. He seems pretty competent otherwise.
Yeah, right.
For everyone else.
Hey, R2, show that holographic recording we made.
And then there's one other thing Palpatine mentions in episode 1 when the bureaucrats lean into the former Chancellor Valorum to say, maybe you should go with the Trade Federation on this. And Palpatine goes, oh, here we see the influence and the strength of the bureaucrats who are on the payroll of the Trade Federation. That's problematic.
Yeah.
Imagine if in Canadian Parliament, the Privy Council office, the advisors to the Prime Minister, were being paid for by the Liberal Party or by just by one of the political parties or just random MPs rather than by Parliament as a whole.
Yeah, that is super sketchy. Although maybe one of those, they're on the payroll in an informal, we're not keeping, they're not in the central payment system here, but we're shoveling the money under the table.
There seemed to be a lot of corruption a lot of just some good campaign finance reform would really have prevented a lot of dodgy stuff in the Republic.
I like to think that was Palpatine's long game. Of all the Sith users we've seen, he's been the one with the smartest long game. Like he's been evil for a long, long time at this point. He's already a pretty old guy in the prequels, and he's finally up at this power level he wants to be, and he's laying his plan, and he's like removing power from people and like corrupting here. And we know that he's got influence with the Trade Federation. So he might have even be the reason why those bureaucrats are on the payroll of the Trade Federation. He might have said, here's what you need to do. Pay off the bureaucrats to slow down the Chancellor, right? It's probably something, and that's why he knows. So now he's able to use it much like a politician would when pointing at corruption he's responsible for. Oh, look at those corrupt guys over there. They're so corrupt. Not like me, who made them corrupt. Could be that.
Well, and he probably had influence in the courts as well. There's mentions of a Supreme Court system. I don't know how many levels of court they have, but by episode 2, they're like, Viceroy Gunray of the Trade Federation's escaped trial 5 times. Man, there's 10 years between episodes 1 and 2. To get a trial through the Canadian court system takes about 6-7 years if you're going all the way to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
At least their courts are efficient if they can try this guy multiple times to the highest level.
I guess that's the advantage of all the droids and technology they've got.
Yeah.
Somehow.
It might not deliver justice, but it's swift.
Do they have justice droids? Right? Maybe that's it. Just like their medical droids. They're like, here's what he did. Here's the evidence we've got. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, here's what you have to do.
Judge Judy style.
Yeah. Bonk, bonk. Oh, wait, that's Law and Order.
So you bring up Palpatine's long game and plotting, and he's obviously the most strategic person probably in the entire series.
Yeah. Of all the problems I have with the prequels, the things I really, really appreciate are that basically the bad guy wins every time. Like in that first one, we're like, yay, Naboo is free. But at the end, Sidious is like, it's all going according to my plan. He didn't really care if Naboo got killed or whatever. He just wanted the vote of no confidence for the Chancellor so he could become the Chancellor. And then in the next one, it's like, yes, the clone army is now under my control, because that's all he wanted. It doesn't matter who won what fight or if the Jedi got wiped out. He would have preferred it, right? He doesn't get his optimal win condition, but he's the one just like being sneaky, win.
Yeah, Palpatine was probably the strongest part of the prequels.
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing it really showcases is what Naomi Klein coined as shock doctrine, which is either exploiting a natural disaster or enforcing an economic crisis on a smaller nation and using that to push through radical economic, social, whatever change.
Yeah.
And she points to a lot of South American examples that she says the US did. You can agree or disagree with those, but the premise of, hey, let's cause this giant crisis or let's have a crisis, and then following it, we got to do all these things now. We got to have someone with supreme power because look how bad things got if we don't.
Look at that one bad thing. These 2 buildings fell down. We've got to go to war with terrorism. Yeah, it's and these days I think even shock has just turned into virality. Like whatever goes kind of viral in your followers, you can use that to convince them that your policies should get pushed through more. Yeah.
And so with this, he instigates to some extent the Naboo blockade and just pushes it to a larger and larger crisis. But even that's kind of a fringe outside event because no one seemed to care about Naboo.
No.
And yet,
until he told them to.
But yet most of the Senate, I think, was just tired of Valorum, and so they saw it as an opportunity to kick the loser out.
Because again, Palpatine was probably whispering to them all, "Oh, look at how he's so slow. Oh, look at these bureaucrats. They're in the pocket of the Trade Federation. Keep paying them, Trade Federation." Like I see him responsible for almost all of it because he's so charming and nice. He's this pleasant old man, smiling all the time, and he just wants what's best for everybody. So yeah, he could totally have laid the groundwork for that over the last 20 years. He could have been doing it.
And from there, it basically evolves from him becoming chancellor to the creation of the Army of the Republic, because he gets emergency powers, which is, I guess, the Galactic War Measures Act.
Yeah.
Reforms the Senate into the Imperial Senate and the First Galactic Empire. And as far as I can tell, that Senate is just basically the rubber stamp.
Yeah.
Which I think even Hitler for a while had a similar, here's my parliament, or here's the Nazi Reichstag. I'm probably getting parts of this wrong. I don't know.
What Venezuela's just recently done.
But it turns out even a rubber stamp Senate to keep the planets in line wasn't enough for Palpatine. And by the time we get to A New Hope, and the first couple minutes in, Tarkin walks into the meeting room of the Death Star and says, "The Emperor has just disbanded the Imperial Senate." Well, who will control the planets?
The local governors.
The local governors, and fear of this battle station. And that's the only reference to the Senate for 30 years.
Yeah, although from the movies, it does look like the Senate has some power and pull, because like throughout Rogue One, the bad guys seem pretty concerned about the Senate finding out about the Death Star before it's ready, and which would indicate that the Senate has some pull, and it was only when they were fairly secure in their ability to blow up a planet, however briefly, that they got rid of that.
It might have been one of those cases where they were willing to go along with a lot, but planet destroying was a psychological barrier that they were like, oh wait, maybe we could vote no.
Yeah, well, I think the real, like the power of that Death Star, the hoped power, right, were it to be, not easily killable with a single proton torpedo, was, look, do what we say, or we're going to fly this giant thing to your planet and blow your planet up and kill billions of people. And it was so powerful to do that even like a fully corrupted Senate would be like, wait, what? No, we can't. We're going to tell our home planets about that. And we're all going to rise up against you and destroy it before it's finished. And so Palpatine, again, being a careful long-term planner, was like, keep everything quiet until we're ready.
Well, and that's even in episode 2 where the Geonosian separatists are designing up the plans. They're like, we have to keep this secret.
Yeah.
And they did. Dooku's like, oh, I'll take this back to Coruscant to keep it safe and out of the hands of the Senate. I'm like, you took it as close as you could.
They'll never expect it to be
someone
here.
should have raised a flag there, but that's a prequel issue.
See, he's the smart one. Dooku, not smart.
No.
Yeah, also part of it is the galaxy is just very big and hard to administer, and the Senate, I think, was needed to also handle some of the administrative functions, where without it, and you didn't really have an alternative method very easily, because the Imperial Starfleet's big, but it's not big enough to regularly park a Star Destroyer over every planet.
And you have to have somebody responsible for that planet to tell them, now get the planet to do this. And I guess the Senate was good to do that, right? You'd be like, okay, go back to your planet and tell them this is what the rules are now. Okay, good.
Well, I think even most of history, large empires still let there be some autonomous local control, because Nero in Rome doesn't give a shit about what they're doing in Britannia or elsewhere in
and there's a
his
state
empire.
capacity issue too,
Yeah.
which is at the center of it.
So letting them be a bit free lowers the chance of rebellion, and as long as they still fall within your box, you can let that box be a little bit bigger without too much risk to your empire, I guess, if you're the evil kind. So once the Senate's disbanded, you have the Rebel Alliance, and that's even starting to form during Rogue One and some of the lead up to that. But what we see in Rogue One is this useless committee of random generals, they're not even generals. There was like Mon Mothma and some of the other
Politicians,
political figureheads of it, representatives, I guess, of
various planets, I think.
planets, and rebel forces. So they have trouble making decisions, or at least they made a decision. It was just the wrong one.
Yeah,
But it was solved by another just runaway rogue unit who.
Yeah, it's why it's not a great idea to run a war through a committee.
Oh my goodness, are we pro-fascism now?
Well, military units can run different than governments and political units.
Yeah, I guess they kind of have to.
But following that, the alliance just drifts out of the focus, and what we, I guess, focus on instead is the military side. And we see a couple more appearances of Mon Mothma and the political side. But I think after that failure, they realized, like, let's let the military do its thing, and we can decide what priorities to tell the military. But if it comes down to, like, should we capture the plans that may or may not exist, or at least, like, scout to see if that's a thing?
Yeah, one of my favorite lines I got from an old, way back when I did graphic design, a real estate guy who used to be in the military, a line he used to say all the time, and he put it on his business cards. Time spent on recon is seldom wasted.
I love still frequently used.
Yeah.
I heard that a lot.
It's a good one. And it's true. Like, you can send some recon there and take a look, gather some intel.
So the Alliance gets at least enough magic military victories, and eventually we reach the Battle of Endor and Return of the Jedi. They blow up the second Death Star. And then after the Battle of Endor and the rebels win that, they start plans to create a new republic with a new Senate. And they keep battling the Empire because there's a bunch of generals and admirals and other random Star Destroyer captains who are like, fuck this, I have a fucking Star Destroyer. I'm going to keep killing people. So Empire and New Republics keep fighting for a few more years, and then it's been retconned in. There's this Battle of Jakku, and that's why we see all these Star Destroyers in Force Awakens crashed in the desert. And following that loss by the Empire, they surrender. They agree to this Galactic Concordant with the New Republic, where for whatever reason, the Republic side says, all right, here's how we'll set this up. You can have these inner core worlds that are kind of unexplored. Nobody really likes them. Just go hide there.
Did they say that, or did just a bunch of them leave for there?
It sounded like they were given that territory.
Okay.
Under the Wikipedia article. So they give the Empire some space, and they agree that both sides will disarm. So I guess it was a sort of Treaty of Versailles, but without the reparations. Although they took all of the land, all of the planets to the New Republic. And they set up this new Senate, but what they did instead of just putting the Senate in the old Senate was they said, whoever's chancellor, your planet is now the capital of the galaxy, and we'll move the Senate there, which is a terrible idea.
Unless your Senate building's a giant spaceship.
Well, even then, you still have what would have to be a massive civil service that you have to pick up and move every time the executive branch changes its head.
Like right now, the European Union has two capitals, essentially, because they have, the parliament has meeting rooms in Brussels and they have meeting rooms in Strasbourg. They have two parliamentary chambers and they kind of just go back and forth. But most of the rest of the European Union stuff is just in Brussels.
Okay.
But France is like, we're not giving up our capital because the Court of Human Rights is also there. So Strasbourg should be at least as much a capital as Belgium. And
Europe is fairly small. It'd be more equivalent to moving the civil service from Ottawa to Vancouver to Tuktoyaktuk, like all over every 5 years or so.
Canada did move its capital around a few times in the early days. It wasn't always Ottawa. It was Toronto, I think, Kingston and other places.
Kingston had the distinct disadvantage of you could see the Americans from it.
So they had to move it further. But they didn't move it when the Prime Minister came from Quebec versus Ontario versus the West.
The thing is, because Star Wars is so easy to handwave stuff, because again, it's a fantasy and doesn't have to be that realistic, I'm already imagining like a Star Destroyer-sized ship that basically is the Senate, and that's where people can live in it, right? It's huge, it's Star Destroyer size. And then they just go, oh, Senate's here, and they land it, and it's there. And then, oh, we got to move it 4 years later, 8 years later, takes off, lands somewhere else.
The bigger problem is they seem to have set up all of the same ineffective democratic systems that existed in the prequel version because they're still unable to really cope with the fact the First Order has come out of the skeleton remains of the Empire.
And like with the fresh memory of Alderaan being destroyed by a super weapon created by these bad guys, like how long does it take to forget that?
Apparently not long.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking 30 some odd years here. That should be fresh in a lot of people's memory.
And so the excuse that's retconned in is when everyone found out Leia is Vader's daughter, they just went, well, fuck her. She's clearly evil too.
See, it would make more sense to do kind of like a post-World War I sort of thing where it was just everybody's really tired of the whole war thing, so we're going to try and pretend nobody's plotting another one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. That would explain the disarming on both sides as well. Because my thing would be like, you know what was a real problem? That we disarmed and then we had to make this evil clone army. Maybe we should keep having an army to keep the peace generally here.
Because what they did after World War II is told Japan and Germany, you're disarming.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
Also, there was like the US and Soviet Union on both sides of Germany, and they were like, well, neither of us is disarming because we're already pointing at each other. But Japan thrived after disarmament, and so did Germany.
The Western part.
The Western part.
You have to disarm the people who want to make super weapons.
But if you make super weapons illegal, only criminals will have super weapons.
That's exactly right. So make sure the criminals don't have them.
Watch out for the super predators with super weapons. So Leia tried to warn people, but she had no political cred. She was labeled a paranoid warmonger.
Yeah, just led the galaxy to freedom and safety. Whatever.
But Vader's daughter. Balance that scale.
Defeated him.
And so this is a literal quote. The centrists
Yes.
quoted in the Senate are the ones who went, come on, Leia. The Nazi threat isn't real.
I know. It's so fresh. It's so today. I love that about The Last Jedi and the whole setup, that the original series very much seems like World War II with the Nazis and all that kind of stuff, and the rise and the problems and the fight and the war, and then it's over. And then very, very quickly people forget how bad Nazis are. And the people who are like, no, look, the Nazis are coming back. This is a big problem. People are like, they've got the right to free speech and build planet-sized super weapons if they want.
You can't call them the Empire because they call themselves the First Order. That's different.
Yeah. And how do you believe that they're still disarmed when they're going around and snatching children and turning them into stormtroopers? Surely there's some evidence of that going on.
Well, and basically what happened is the First Order built up its military in the core world so much that right after The Force Awakens and they blow up the Hosnian system in the Senate, they launch all their ships out and take thousands of planets in a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They were ready, and the only people fighting back was the Resistance, which was Leia's like, well, fuck the Republic and its attempt to demilitarize, so I'm just going to start a
Militia.
Literally just a militia.
Yeah.
And we'll do things ourselves.
And then we see that in The Last Jedi, and they're on the run.
So that runs us through basically the lifespan of the 2 attempts at Senate democracy in the canon Star Wars universe. I think that covers most of the political, essentially just mistakes of their world.
I mean, the difference between, a fascist dictatorship who has absolute control and a bunch of people where everybody gets a say and arguing takes a long time and it's hard to get anything done. And there's got to be a midpoint somewhere.
Yeah, they clearly followed a very bad model of democracy that was ineffectual.
Yeah. Is that something that maybe your listeners could do, is say, this is the model that a galaxy-spanning civilization should use with multiple cultures? What is the best way to do that? I know that Canada considers itself multicultural.
But it's not as multicultural as even the world. So the United Nations, like I was mentioning, is our largest attempt as a species to get along. Yeah. And it's filled with problems because you have a bunch of people who are given vetoes because the only reason they were going to buy into this thing is to say, well, I'm only joining that if he who I hate can't do things that I don't want them to do. And he goes, well, same. And we have the biggest military, so we get it. Yeah. Might makes right. I do like the model that the European Union is moving towards. And because it was originally founded as mostly just a labor trade agreement, and it's now grown into a parliamentary democracy, that's getting more and more power away from the European Council, which is essentially just representatives of each country get together and agree things. And now they have elected representatives who have strict finance laws.
I think the problem in Star Wars is the institutional capacity isn't at the level that's needed to govern an entire galaxy.
Can you govern an entire galaxy? Could we even govern this entire planet?
It would be hard to do on any sort of, that scale.
Because the UN mostly passes declarations that are like feel-good statements, and then puts some money from like rich countries to poor countries to try to rebalance the wealth a little bit, and tries to...
Part of the problem with the UN is it doesn't really have an enforcement mechanism beyond... I mean, I guess the countries can kind of do it if they want to, but no one's going to hold their feet to the fire on it.
And it has no military. It has the peacekeepers, but each country gets to decide whether or not they want to take part in a peacekeeping operation. So the UN can go, all right, we're going to send peacekeepers to stop those two countries from fighting. Anyone want to sign up?
Well, if they kept with the Korean War model where the UN actually did fight it, like they were UN forces fighting in Korea. From here, I guess we're going to pivot into the military and starting off with the kind of strategic level stuff. So one thing that keeps reappearing in Star Wars is the super weapon. They had 2 Death Star, Starkiller Base. The expanded universe had how many super weapons? It's a trope at this point in Star Wars.
Yeah, it's one of the key things that you see, at least up until Last Jedi. I don't know. Well, Empire didn't have one either, so Last Jedi and Empire kind of are similar that way.
Maybe it's a mid-movie, a second movie thing.
I hope
none of the
get
prequels actually had a super weapon.
Yeah, that's true. That almost made them worse, though. It was all political machinations and just like,
badly done political machinations.
Yeah.
My favorite take on super weapons, and this comes from, I think, the original Clerks, is when they're sitting around shooting the shit about why the one guy feels worse about the second Death Star blowing up than the first. And he goes, it's all the contractors. Like, you have Joe Schmo getting this big government contract to put windows in or something. Yeah, he's going to take that. It puts food on the table for his Wookiee kids or whatever.
Yeah.
But that guy dies, whereas everyone working on Death Star 1 was working for the Empire.
Yeah.
They were stormtroopers. Now, I would say there was a lot of sanitation and other probably
still if
minimum wage employers.
If you're working on the Death Star, you kind of know what you're getting into. It's in the title.
But that's where they get to in the Clerks discussion is conveniently a contractor walks in and he goes, I had this chance to work a mob boss house, and I went, nope.
Well, I think Last Jedi covered a bit of that. One is we know that the janitors were actually stormtroopers, because Finn was a janitor stormtrooper, right? And then we also find out what the contractors are like, because we see them on Canto Bight. And maybe not the guys who work for them, but those guys taking the contracts are wealthy and corrupt and deserve it. So I kind of wished some of those rich guys had been like there to oversee the final bits of the Death Star too, and maybe some of them got lost. And Clerks even mentions it. They had a contractor. Now I'm a contractor, and I take into account who I'm working for.
So the economics of super lasers never work.
Yeah, and that's the thing is they spend a lot of resources building 2 moon-sized battle stations and later carving out a planet to make a weapon out of, and that cannot be a cheap way to go about it, even discounting the huge markup that military contracts get.
That Starkiller Base bothered me so much, mostly because, so they do this shot of a planet and it's got this giant trench along the thing of it, and I'm like, that trench would collapse. There's no way that the gravity would not make, you're talking about a thing probably 500 kilometers tall right there. It would just fall over. You can't make it stay that way.
And then we have faster than light lasers that destroy entire systems, and it eats up a sun. Are there multiple suns around?
Well, that's the thing is, does it just
so many questions?
It dimmed the sun, so it was super solar power somehow. Yeah. I don't.
Well, it's nice they're being green about their planet-killing weapons,
right? They wanted to make it coal powered.
Well, what I pointed out,
the trench was they dug up all the coal out of that trench first, and then used that to power it up the first time.
What I pointed out before with Joe is that The Last Jedi is the first time they actually talk about fuel requirements in Star Wars. Before that, they just hyperspace jumped willy-nilly, except when it didn't work on the Falcon. But they never seemed to worry about actually fueling up their ships or their snub fighters or anything like that. Even the games I played, the many X-Wing versus TIE Fighter going back that far games, never really worried about fuel.
Yeah.
But now suddenly you have a finite number of jumps.
It feels like generally you've got enough. It's probably very efficient, right? You don't really worry about it. You fuel up maybe at once a month or something like that in the Falcon, and it's not too expensive. But in The Last Jedi, they're on the run. They've been fighting. They haven't been able to buy it. They've been spending their money on other things, and so the ship has only got a few little bits of jumps left.
So besides super lasers,
so the super weapon thing seems to be quite a bit of a waste of resource and probably not worth the effort overall. You're going to build 2 giant space stations that last like a week in operation. It's probably one of those things you're better off building just a whole bunch of Star Destroyers, especially if you're having trouble finding the rebels because you don't have enough ships to scout the galaxy.
Yeah. So getting back to Palpatine being the long-term planner, and remember the instant that he dissolved the Senate was the instant that the Death Star was fully operational. So these Death Stars, because he had to have been planning at least the 2 of them this whole time. You can't just be like, oh well, one's gone, let's build the other. They've been making 2 of them. These Death Stars were part of his plan to have absolute control over the galaxy. So somehow his force powers didn't let him see the one weakness. He was, as Vader said, a little too proud of this technological terror. But I feel like the Emperor can also kind of see the future a little. So I think he knew that they would at least blow up a planet or 2, and he thought, well, that'll be enough to make everybody. That'll be fear. Alderaan will die. I see that, right?
Well, and the Force future vision seems very clouded by your emotions. So if you get excited about something, you probably overestimate that versus your own downfall. None of them tended to see.
I think, it's been proven now, right, that even with force powers and seeing the future, that the other side of the force is going to come along, the light side's going to come along, give those plucky rebels a chance. Yeah, putting all your eggs in one basket. Bad idea, it seems.
Even 2 baskets.
Even 2 baskets.
Although it did work out for the First Order, it was effective for them.
They got their one big shot, yeah.
Still probably would have been better to launch 1,000 Star Destroyers over the Hosnian system and just blow them away.
Yeah, because
you could build 1,000 Star Destroyers
for
they
have those
cost of building a planet-sized base.
Yeah, out of the metal they mined from that trench they dug.
Well, and they have multiple of these dreadnought things we see in Last Jedi, which are just flying battle stations that just take out everything in their way. In terms of destroying the Hosnian Senate, send a couple of those dreadnoughts. All of the Star Destroyers that they brought out right after they blew up the Senate to capture all the planets, take that and then spread out across the galaxy. I guess maybe they didn't want to centralize all their force for one battle. They wanted to knock out the Senate and take the galaxy like that, which they did.
One of the things you generally want to do is concentrate your forces, and spreading them out inadvisable.
I think if we try to look at what their plan was, right? If they had been able to use Starkiller Base, destroy all those planets, and then do that launch to take over all the systems and stuff, and still have Starkiller Base, that's a win. They're done. That they've got the galaxy again, because they just go, we're sending our ships out to take over everything, and if anybody stops us, your planet's next. And, nothing to stop them. So at least blowing up Starkiller Base meant all they could do was take those neighboring systems, I guess. So the plan was build this giant thing, and probably in the name of the former emperor, right? We're going to do what the emperor failed to do.
But one up him. Because we're that
That's
arrogant.
Right. Third time's the charm, everybody. Oops.
Third time was not the charm.
Third time is not the charm. I really hope Episode 9 does not have a super weapon.
The First Order strategy, not that great, but ended up working.
Yeah.
Mainly because they were fighting a military that didn't really want to be a military and a bunch of ragtag rebels. Rebellions generally don't work. They have a good tactic of hit and fade, and that's what the rebels, when they're at their best, do really well, is that guerrilla warfare style.
Yeah.
And that you can do a lot of damage with very few people. Like what they even do on Scarif in Rogue One.
And Rogue One is the best in terms of the military tactics used in it. And yeah, for that one, it's that sort of asymmetric, go in, hit them, pull them away. And on Jeddah, the ambush of the Imperial, that's the sort of thing they should be doing.
Yeah.
It's hits the Empire where they're weak, where they're removing the Kyber crystals. It's seeking to disrupt their objective rather than kill their forces outright.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's all about hitting them where they're weak, doing it quickly, and then pulling back. And they set up a fairly standard conventional L-shaped ambush, executed not badly, all things considered. There were still a bunch of shit they could have done better, but it's not the crazy incompetent tactics you see in the prequel trilogy where we're just going to stand out in the open and walk towards the enemy shooting.
Yeah.
They're blaster rifles. It's not muskets they have. The tactics need to evolve.
You're allowed to take cover. It's totally fine.
But it's recommended.
And we saw cover in the first fight in the first movie that we ever saw, A New Hope, right? Like, remember the ships being boarded, Princess Leia's ships being boarded, and everybody's like standing around corners and up against little things sticking out of the wall and trying to stay behind and fighting smart, and the troopers just come in and just...
And then on Hoth, they had trenches and defensive cannons set up. They're not great against walkers.
Yeah, they're poorly set up, and we'll get to Hoth in a bit. But the one thing that I will give the prequel some slack for is it's after a prolonged period of peace. They don't have a stand-in army, so it's understandable that they don't have that institutional warfighting knowledge.
Yeah. They're also recruiting spontaneously the Jedi into roles as generals.
Yeah, which is really weird, because...
Everybody becomes spontaneously generals. Like, Han Solo comes back and like shoots one TIE fighter to help them blow up the first Death Star, and then the next movie it's like, are your forces ready, General Solo?
Well, he did have a brief stint as a commander, and I think that was his rank in Empire. Yeah, it's super weird that you have a general commanding what's at best a platoon-sized force.
Yeah. It's probably the Princess Queen problem. These are not the right words. We're being translated from a million-year-old language that uses that weird Star Wars alphabet.
So the prequels just generally throw giant armies at each other?
Yes, in the most incompetent sort of way. And
just a way to show off a big CG battle with like weird weapons and catapulting blobs of energy and force fields.
In Episode 3, you did have the droid army come in with Grievous, kidnap the Emperor, who's clearly in on it, because you don't walk into Coruscant, take the highest ranking person, and leave without him obviously being in on it, but people miss that. And that was mostly attempted hit and fade. They didn't get away with it, and they lose Dooku at that battle. So hit and fades don't always work, especially when you go for the biggest target.
It also failed in Road One on the beaches of Scarif.
They got their target. They just didn't have an exit strategy.
Well, I was thinking more the diversionary troops. Like on that battle, what they should have been doing is shortly after establishing contact, they should have broke contact, moved elsewhere, and started fighting there at a time and place of their choosing. And instead, they got pinned by Imperial forces.
I was also thinking they needed to blow up the doors of those like lateral elevators, train things to the central station. Since they were clearly dropping charges everywhere, drop charges on those doors, since that's where most of the stormtroopers came out onto the beaches. Or that would have at least cut. They would have still had the walkers and a few other things, but
troopers get there.
Yeah,
it's like they had a bunch of individual soldiers, but they didn't really have any good tacticians or commanders going on.
Yeah,
that makes sense with how they pulled that crew together.
Yeah, it was very thrown together. Yeah, and they made a bunch of other mistakes there. Like when encountering the walkers, they ran away rather than moving laterally or towards them to exit their arcs of fire.
Yeah, I got a few problems with Rogue One actually, and the whole strategy that was going on there. It just felt like, we'll do this. It's a bad idea, but they did it. I mean, it turns out to be kind of a bad idea. They got the plans away, but like everybody died.
Yeah,
and like it was just a horrible delaying tactic, and that was it.
So yeah, I guess that moves us on to the Galactic Civil War, where their Empire and the Rebel Alliance square off, and the Empire's main objective was, of course, to maintain and expand its political and military control, and the Rebels were trying to upset that order and replace it. But as Ian mentioned earlier, that's a pretty hard thing to do, and especially when you're massively outgunned.
You versus the galaxy.
And the Rebels' biggest successes are also the biggest losses for their forces. And this happens even with the Resistance, because they have to exert so much of their force to take down the Death Star or just take down Starkiller Base that after it, they're just kind of on the run in both cases.
Yeah, when you're in insurgency, you want to avoid a decisive battle. And, just how Star Wars was done, they tended to focus on the decisive battles the rebels were forced into by circumstance. And it was being forced there that made them have to commit their fleets to, destroy the 2 Death Stars. But in the 5 years or so between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, there was probably a lot of those sort of hit and runs, attacking the Empire where they're weak, hitting their command and control stuff, that disrupting their ability to conduct operations or exert their influence.
Whereas the Empire's biggest mistake seemed to just be killing rather than training better generals. especially in Empire, where Vader burns through 4 people, I think, just in succession. He's just like, no, you fucked up. Time to die.
Yeah.
You're promoted.
Yeah, that creates a culture that is very risk-averse in the Imperial ranks. And that's not the sort of thing you want in military. You want a much more kind of flexible mission command oriented setup where officers are encouraged to, seize opportunities that present themselves. Whereas if you fuck up, you die, gives you a very strong incentive to bump everything up to the next level and get someone else to make the
Pass
decision.
the buck, yeah. And also not get promoted. Like, do not stand out so that once one guy gets force choked to death and dies in front of you, that you're the next guy in line to get force choked. Like, no, I'll stay captain. That's fine.
Like
Captain's fine.
all those guys who are in the gray suits and hats sitting underneath the walkway on the bridge of the Death Star, they're in a good position.
Yes.
Like, just keep working the comms or whatever you're doing. You're not a
too good at it.
stormtrooper out there getting shot.
Yeah.
You're not up there dealing with Vader, who's temperamental as fuck. You're just keeping your head down, plotting a next hyperspace jump. That's fine. That's easy to do.
I do feel like that quick murder thing was pretty Vader centric though. Like the one dark side of the Force guy, because they're about anger, right? And that's what that was with Vader, which was like dark side, dead.
Well, and even Kylo Ren doesn't choke Hux despite Hux getting worse.
Or that guy who has to break the news about Jakku.
Oh God, his little hissy fits. I loved them. And the reaction from those people, like in the first one, there's the 2 stormtroopers who see it, and then one of them puts his arm in front of them, they turn around and walk away. In the other, you actually get the facial expression of one of the people. Yeah, great stuff.
There's a weird tension where in The Force Awakens and less so in Last Jedi, where Kylo Ren is clearly not a high-ranking officer because Hux is ordering him around. And that's sort of where Vader was at the start of A New Hope, where Tarkin's like, no, you're my bitch.
Yes,
and
release him, Vader.
Or what my favorite Imperial officer is the guy on the captured rebel ship at the beginning of A New Hope who's just like shit-talking Vader's plan, holding her as dangerous and everything.
That's right.
He's the only officer in the entire series that talks to Vader, and he's like some mid-level officer.
And his delivery is like, what the hell are you doing? Like, he is like, she'll never talk to you. She'd rather die than give up. He's like basically saying, you're an idiot to Darth frickin' Vader.
But I guess Vader wasn't Supreme General at that point. He was just hanging around. I guess he was like Palpatine's pet.
But here's the thing, like,
Killed all the Jedi. Like, he's dangerous. You know that.
And in a movie that in the series happened a day earlier at most, he force choked one of the highest ranking military directors in the Empire.
Yeah. And all he got was a little bit of a talking to. Release him. It wasn't release him and don't do that anymore.
Yeah. We
That
talked
was-
chain of command in the Rebels then? Because
Yes.
that seems much more flexible, both by necessity, I imagine, because they don't have as many people.
I'm guessing they get the turnover of people not from them killing each other, but just from their plans being terrible and people dying all the time.
Yeah, that does seem to happen a fair bit. But they have a much more flexible structure, and the rebel leader are much more willing to take the initiative and seize any opportunities. Finally, I guess we should narrow down on kind of the lower level tactical decisions that are made or in some cases not made.
Yeah.
I just rewatched most of Star Wars in preparation for this, and this is like the first time I've done it with a serious critical look at the military aspect, and man, are they terrible at it.
Well, and
War
you've
fighting.
also read a few blogs and found a whole podcast on this as well.
We got the idea to do this in part because I shared a link to one of them, and I'll give a shout out to Angry Staff Officer. You can find it Twitter at PPT Sapper. He has some great stuff on it. Some staff officer in the U.S. military, clearly an engineer, and
Yeah. Sapper. Yeah.
writes a bunch on Star Wars. Also, the podcast that Ian just mentioned is War Stories, which he does, which I started listening to, and it's pretty good. And they do an episode on the armored vehicles of Star Wars.
Okay.
Interestingly, best one was from episode 1, the tank that the Trade Federation has. In their assessment is
The
the
little
best
single droid tank kind of things.
larger tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were interesting.
Yeah.
Right? They were hover tanks, I think.
The hover tanks.
Yeah. Those look good because they're low to the ground.
Low to the
giant
ground.
gun.
More maneuverable than any of the other stuff that has to roll or walk, which is a terrible idea.
Gun can point in more than one direction.
Right, yeah.
Can point sideways.
Now, they had the distinct problem of being operated by idiots and not taking advantage of the maneuver capabilities that a hover tank offers.
I kind of love the Trade Federation droids because they feel like they're like mass market cheapos. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're a Trade Federation, you assign one of your middle managers to go pick the proper droids that you're going to get, and they're like, well, how many do we need? Oh, as many as we can get. All right, I won't buy all the most of the good ones. Let's get the cheap ones that are disposable.
Should they each have their own AI? No, put the AI in a spaceship.
Yeah.
That can never go wrong.
Yeah, put all the eggs in one
Never
basket.
mind that there are clearly lots of autonomous AI-powered droids, R2-D2, C-3PO. I can see an advantage to having your droids networked so that they can strategize,
Work better, yeah.
instantly, create
But
a
being
tactic,
able to
but
operate independently if the communications go down or if there's jamming
Yeah.
or
that would be
someone
good.
blows up the ship.
Like, yeah, even if they had just said when that ship blows up that they lose any kind of tactical advantage and communication they have, so mopping them up is easy, right? But
they still could have wiped out the Gungans, though.
Yeah.
yeah, the Gungans needed to be better fighters too. It's just
Their point was to get in the way and die.
yes, it was.
That was literally the strategy in episode 1. You die so Amidala can sneak in and hopefully capture Nute Gunray.
What was the point of that big fight in the field?
There's a
It was distraction.
diversion.
It was
don't
to
wanna
draw
be-
the forces out of the capital. So
Oh, that's right.
Their little...
I don't want to be a diversion in Star Wars because that means
That
you
ends
die.
badly.
Yeah, I guess good that it was the Gungans. They should have done it somewhere where the Gungans had some kind of tactical advantage. Isn't that what Sun Tzu would say? Fight where you're strong and they're weak. Like lure them into the water, maybe.
Yes, and Sun Tzu also talks about using the ground effectively, which is something that no one in Star Wars does at all.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not true. The Rebels do cite their base fairly well in Empire Strikes Back. At the end of Alon Valley, basically forces the Empire into that's ridgeline on either side, limits their time maneuver. But that was the one smart decision that's been made to actually evaluate the ground
Yeah.
and use it effectively in the entire Star Wars universe.
Yeah, and they had the big hope that they just wouldn't be found. I mean, it was kind of lucky that Vader, well, there's no such thing as luck apparently, but lucky that the probe droid made it there and found them and was able to beam off a message before it got blown up.
It looked like they were sending out a lot. So what should the rebels have done on Hoth, though?
So the main objective they had there is a delaying operation, right? Basically slow the Empire down, give them time to escape, just they weren't going to go toe-to-toe and try and hold the base. But if you actually watch it, they are completely ineffective at it. If they didn't have rebel troops engage them, the Walkers would have taken the exact same amount of time to reach the shield generator and blow it up.
Yeah, a couple less would have tripped over and blown up, but the rest would have showed up and
Yeah, and
got
the
it.
Empire can lose 2 Walkers and not notice it.
Yeah, they were juggernauts, just stomping forward to an inevitable destruction of that shield generator.
Those speeders spent a lot of time going straight at them, and then from the sides. They also had X-Wings there, which they could have just picked up, and we saw X-Wings take out at least the Scarif AT-ATs, but those might have been the
think
knockoff
they were-
cheaper ones.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they
sort of like
felt
the
they were
cargo
smaller
version.
and yeah.
But I still feel like X-Wings have more fighter power than speeders.
I would agree because they
But-
can blow up like emplacements on giant battle
So-
stations.
But maybe it's a weather thing. Let's give
Well,
them
I
that.
think the more important issue there is that the X-Wings were tasked with supporting the evacuation and getting the transports off planet safely.
yeah.
So that was the main center of gravity of the rebels in that operation. So that's where they wanted their main air defenses to be. So what they should have done is they actually should have prepared the ground effectively and the battle space to effectively delay the Imperial encroachment. And for that, they needed a bunch of combat engineers, which the rebels clearly do not have. In fact, no one in Star Wars appears to have, even though they are very important militarily. And what they should have done is effectively lay out a series of obstacles and counter mobility setups to prevent the Empire from advancing on them. So
The Walker equivalent of tank traps, yeah.
yeah, so you can do tank ditches, just scale it up slightly.
Trenches feel like they would have stopped a walker if your trench is as big as...
If you make
for
it, if you
walkers.
make it deep enough and wide enough, like one of its feet would have to go into it in order to move
Yeah.
forward, and it would totally fall over. Yeah,
Yeah, so you could do that. You can do wire entanglements. We use them now against people, but scale them up. You can use them against other things that walk.
They did. They put them on their speeders and
yes, but you could prepare a whole bunch of them ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that would have slowed them down, and then they would have had to deploy their own engineers, which the Empire apparently doesn't have either, which is another oversight.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine in my head now that they did this, but the Empire always had like a counter move to it. Like ahead of these walking AT-ATs, you've got these droids moving forward, and then they just fill up the holes in front of them, or they wipe out all the mines, or they cut all the other stuff, so that you just add more forces and it becomes more complicated. But I like the idea of a moat. Just a moat.
Well, they could have dug a tank trench as well as mine the approaches, a whole bunch of stuff like that. Yeah, so what they should have done is prepared the area and then covered the obstacles with ideally indirect fire, which is something that's very rare in Star Wars. You briefly see it in the Clone Wars. And basically have a series of these defensive positions arrayed, and every time they have to encounter one, the Empire has to then deploy their engineers, clear it out, and then they get slowed down with harassing fire from either indirect capabilities or air support, and basically that just slows them down because the rebels didn't really have the guns to take them down very effectively, so they should have focused on making the approach as long and arduous as possible. So use the obstacles to turn their forces so they'd put their flanks to the guns, which one of the main disadvantages of the AT-ATs is they only have a very narrow arc of fire forward, which the rebels were nice enough to fly their speeders right into
multiple times.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the other part where the rebels failed, is they should have attacked from the side.
Yeah. You don't get the same drama of worrying about them because they're constantly, if they were super smart and never got shot at, they'd be shooting from the side and you'd be like, well, they're not doing anything, but they're not in any danger. So they had to make bad decisions in order for there to be actual drama.
Yeah, but they really do love their frontal assault. Like all the fighters and stuff, they never come in from the side. Last Jedi, when the bombers are approaching, the fighters just fly straight at them into the bombers' guns rather than flying at their unprotected flanks. And you see that time and time again.
Yeah, I guess a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, they didn't have really good tactics.
And then the Empire side, their tactics basically seem to have overwhelming firepower and size of force and just move forward in a straight line attacking.
Which isn't terrible, like when you have disposable amounts of military force. It's not great.
Yeah,
I feel like that's how the Romans
at a high cost.
I feel like that's how the Romans fought for hundreds of years.
They had to stab someone.
That's true. They didn't have blasters.
Somewhat accurate fire from a long range, it's not really the same sort of thing. And you never see the Empire properly use the ground or take advantage of whatever the tactical situation is to move things in a way that protects their own forces beyond we have a bunch of armor and disposable people. That's why the Empire was dumb to deploy walkers on Endor.
They were defensive walkers? I don't feel like they're a good defensive weapon.
Well, that's one of the problems with the Empire is, as far as I can tell, their defensive doctrine is have small scouting parties, patrol, and then just deploy the whole force en masse when they encounter the enemy. As opposed to
right to where they are.
As opposed to actually preparing proper defensive works.
Right.
And dug-in fighting positions.
Which is weird because that's the thing that the smaller side in asymmetrical war should be doing, which is, keeping their main troops back and then deploying them where they need to go. Whereas when you've got disposable men, you can just put them wherever you need to put them.
Yeah, but on Endor, one of the entrances to their very important shield generator had 4 people with pistols guarding it. The base on Endor and Scarif as well were very poorly defended.
Well, Scarif did have the full planetary shield, which was actually...
Yeah.
Once you have that running, and it seemed like they were pretty good at...
So did Endor, for that matter, but they still didn't have anything more than just small patrols walking around.
I will note that Luke did tell the Emperor that his overconfidence would be his downfall. And that is a big thing we're talking about now, is the Empire is completely overconfident all the time. They're like, we got a Death Star, you can't do anything. Well, we got a second Death Star, you can't do anything. It's got a shield on this planet. We built Starkiller Base, you can't... Oh, damn it. Why are we so overconfident? That's one of the dark side traits, I guess. Overconfidence. Haha! That's why they lose, because bad guys are overconfident.
And they don't properly defend their bases.
It's because they're overconfident.
Feels like the Empire is really just set up as an offensive army. Like all of their eggs are in the, if we attack and destroy them, we don't really need to defend.
Yeah, the problem is they're fighting an asymmetric war where the rebels attack kind of randomly. Mm-hmm. At the very least, there should have been a couple machine gun positions covering the back door to the Endor base.
Oh, yeah.
That thing was very poorly sighted.
Or a bunch of droids, like those cool shielded attack droids that they had in the prequels.
Yeah.
Right? The roly ones? The destroyer droids is what they're called.
Yeah, or mines, or wire obstacles, or anything. Like, the fact that Ewoks were able to sneak a large force directly up to the base without anyone noticing is a massive oversight.
And they would have had scanners. Like, they've shown scanners.
Well, and the fact that they didn't go out and wipe out all the Ewoks first.
That too.
It's not the kind of thing the Empire cared about.
Clear the area of sentient life in a 10-kilometer radius.
Or even just clear the area right around the door. That clearance would have been more than like 10, 20 meters wide.
Yeah.
And in a depression, too. Like, there's hills on either side of that entrance, which allows the Ewoks to sneak up, and no attempt was made to properly secure that. I can actually even see the point of having it in a depression so you can move troops out without being seen that easily. But you still need to defend it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and on the rebel side, I guess the main failure on Endor was, well, there's a couple things. For one, their commander just left following Leia rather than sticking with the main force.
Basically, all of the senior command just splits and goes off different directions, and
which is bad.
Well, they had to chase down the guys with the speeders so that they couldn't warn them that they were there.
Which is a failure on the Empire's part, because they should have called in contact rather than go off try and manually deliver it they're on a messenger on horseback.
Because it took Leia and Luke a few minutes to jam their comm.
Yeah, so they kill the first two but then the other ones take off, and Luke and Leia have to catch up to them, and then they jam their comms. There is more than enough time for them to call in contact.
Rebels, there's rebels on the planet.
Literally the second thing you're trained to do when you come under contact is call in the contact.
Yeah.
But that leads to the other problem of the rebels having really shitty communications.
Explains how they lose their senior commanders all the time.
Well, your space fleet shouldn't have to rely on sensor readings to know whether or not your ground forces have achieved their mission objective.
Yeah.
They should have had comms between the two of them, and the fact that they didn't is a major problem.
I can see them needing to keep radio silence on the ground, or at least limit their radio to each other, because a transmission off planet would maybe be detectable. Maybe you can't decode it, but you could say, hey, there's a coded message going off our base.
That could certainly be detectable.
Although they probably have already figured it out. If
you blow up a shield generator, you've been detected by that point.
Yeah.
And now you can at least signal to your fleet that they can commence their attack.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason the fleet didn't smack themselves to death into the shield was because Lando realized that they should get a reading up or down, not no reading.
And can we also take a moment to think about how dumb it was to take a bright golden droid with them on their stealth mission?
We better bring this protocol droid with us.
R2 makes sense.
Sure,
R2 has proven himself.
He's a hacker. He's a slicer. He gets in.
Also, the Empire has very shitty cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Okay, there's a reason to bring R2. There's no reason to bring a golden protocol droid that sticks out like a sore thumb on
and
your
stealth
mission. Yeah, when you see them walking away from the shuttle, the rebels in camouflage moving stealthily, and then this just golden droid walking around.
At least spray paint him, right?
Yeah.
Put some tape over his eyes, and then spray paint him like a matte color, matte green.
Camo 3PO.
There you go. That's what we need to see. Although I will say it does pay off, because it's 3PO is the reason why the Ewoks trust them, because he tells the stories.
And they see
but
him
he's
as
able
to
he's the translator. Not that they knew that they would have to.
Well, that's the thing is, it makes sense once you know everything at the end, but it was still a bad decision based on the knowledge the rebels had.
I'm going to pull in my Jedi sometimes see the future card and say that it was Luke's idea. So I have this whole thing. Sorry, another tangent. The whole plot to get frozen Han Solo back is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. unless Luke saw pretty much the whole thing. Right? Saw that Luke said, look, I have to give him a chance. I have to tell him to his face, come on, let's be fair here. But because I know everything that's going to happen, and I can't have my lightsaber there, so we're going to give it to R2, and he'll be on the thing, and he'll shoot it at me, and we'll da-da-da-da. He knew all of that was going to happen because he saw it in the Force, and that's why it played out that way. And that's why that ridiculous thing happened. So in my head now, I'm like, well, Jedi can kind of see the future. Not always, right? Because the dark side muddies it. But in that one, there was no dark side. So Luke was able to be like, here's my plan, and here's how it's going to work, everybody.
Everyone's like, no.
And
no.
Leia, it's going to suck, but then you're going to get to kill the guy while wearing a gold bikini. It's going to be awesome. Like, it totally felt like it was a ridiculous Xanatos gambit. Like, just give the droid my lightsaber for that one time when we'll be on the ship later on. He can shoot it.
I've tried to play that in my mind, I think, as he put it there because it might come in handy and he needed it somewhere. And he probably assumed they'd strip him of weapons when he walked in the door.
Yeah.
So put it somewhere safe. He didn't know where he'd see R2 again, but he'd see R2 again. They always cross paths. So,
well, he planted R2 in there ahead of time.
And so he knew R2 could be around with his lightsaber, and he cross paths with R2, get his lightsaber back. Things get better from there. And so a lot of Star Wars is that sort of like set up all the situations. That's what Palpatine did. Like, he didn't plan every step. He just sort of set up the situations so that no matter what happened, it went his way.
But they snuck Leia in there as a bounty hunter to unfreeze Han and try and get him out. But then that didn't work. If that was supposed to work, they wouldn't need the droids in there. They wouldn't have had to send in 3PO to give him. They wouldn't have had to put that in. They wouldn't have had to have Londo in there, right? All of that stuff didn't need to be there unless they knew Leia's plan wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Alternatively, it was a contingency. Like the first version was Leia gets him out. If that doesn't work, then Luke comes in.
But if Leia's plan had worked, they'd have been out their droids.
Yeah, they'd still have to extract their droids because Luke's lightsaber is now stuck in Jabba's palace.
I can see being like, well, 3PO, fuck him.
You can lose 3PO. R2 you need.
But yeah, especially when he's got the lightsaber.
So, I mean, that's true. But in my head, it's that Jedi can kind of see the future. I mean, we do see it because Luke sees his friends being tortured, right? Which is in the future when he sees it. We know that
Anakin saw his mum.
Right, and we see Yoda complaining that the dark side muddies all of the stuff they normally see. So I have this whole thing in my head that Luke often gets kind of little visions of what we need to do. And Luke probably went, we need to bring C-3PO. It's important that we bring him. But he's a giant golden thing. No, bring him. Trust me, it'll work. And maybe he didn't even know why, right? Because he's not good at it yet. So yeah, I know that's my hand wavy thing is the Force, but it fits into a lot of what we've learned about the Force.
Yeah, still, if I was to rewrite Return of the Jedi, well, you'd probably lose the Ewoks, and 3PO would not be there at all.
Or at least camoed. And then they could sell a camo 3PO toy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. But like, there's a way you could rewrite the Return of the Jedi ground stuff where you can get rid of the Ewoks, and you also have more than like 10 rebels on. Like they're committing all of their forces to this. There's only 10 soldiers they can send on this one,
or a larger force to the front door.
Yeah,
would have been good.
Here's the you could do it where the position is properly defended by the Empire with like dug-in stuff, and then a larger rebel contingent that actually has to like do a proper assault on it. And that could be an interesting way to go about it. And then you don't need the Ewoks. It's much tighter.
Part of the problem is they only had Shuttle Tiberium, which was a pretty small Imperial shuttle that had the right codes to get people down.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And they clearly had the old codes, and the one guy was like, come on. But the Emperor knew they had the codes and wanted them to get down. He was fine with that because he wanted them to get captured so he could piss off Luke. That was a bad plan.
Shoot him out of the sky. Come on.
Yeah,
man.
that was a bad plan.
Yeah. But that's cinematic villains all the time. They never shoot. They never capture James Bond and then go, well, goodbye, blam, and put a bullet in his head.
That is one of the things I liked about The Last Jedi is when Luke walks out, I was just like, every gun right now.
Yes.
Yeah. Just destroy that.
Yes.
Him and everything around him.
But that was the one part of the Battle of Crate there that was probably on the rebel side. Like, their whole speeder attack on the walkers.
Also, another example of going up the front straight into their main.
And this time, they didn't really have a plan.
No. See, I'm more forgiving.
Or weapons.
Yeah, I'm more forgiving of Crate because like they're throwing this together at the last minute. And
shortest distance between 2 points, straight line.
Yeah.
Don't have time to flank.
Yeah,
You
that
always
I'm
have time
forgiving
to
on.
flank.
They
And,
didn't
like-
though. That thing fired like as Finn reached it, it fired.
Yeah.
So
That I can forgive them on. The single linear trench setup, also somewhat forgiving, just as it's just a giant plane. You don't have anything to work with beyond just pushing out a huge perimeter, which they don't have the
and Luke's
resources
plan was exactly the one that we're talking about, which is delay, right?
Yes.
He wasn't going to win anything there. He wasn't even there. He was just there to delay long enough for them to get away, and that's it. He gave his life to do that. But that's exactly it, right? Was just slow it down so they can get away.
Maybe
we haven't taught space battles, really. Is there much to say on it?
Is there much to say on
There's
space
not-
battles? They kind of...
They mostly don't tell you what the overall tactics are. It's just a bunch of things flying all over, and the capital ships
I know what
are
they
off in
remind
their
me of.
clumps.
It's sort of like air battles of World War One,
Which was the kind of inspiration for it.
Totally was.
which are utterly irrelevant to the broader war,
yeah.
but cool. Like
Yeah.
you look at the planes and the characters of World War One air battles. And they have biplanes and triplanes, and then some of the first fighters didn't do anything. Just like ran
Well,
around, killed a few
it's
people each, but maybe influenced
More
a couple
effective
battles.
in Star Wars, just because
Yeah.
the rebels clearly put most of their resources into their fighter fleet rather than their ground forces, which makes a lot of sense.
The rebels in the Star Wars games, like the X-Wing games, their fighters are better. Most of them
yeah.
have shields, whereas TIE fighters are just like disposable, quick build, solar powered,
Yeah.
moderate weapons, whereas X-Wings are a pretty solid fighting platform.
Yeah, they're beefy. That's what you have to do in stories is you have to figure out a way to keep your characters alive
Yeah.
while allowing them to mow down lots of enemies, right? So you just go, oh, well, these TIE fighters are disposable and easy to blow up, so you get to have lots of explosions in space. Yeah. That reminds me of my favorite character in The Last Jedi, actually, who is the commander of that dreadnought. Because he says at the beginning, he's got to launch his fighter screens, which he should have done 5 minutes ago. The entire movie that he's alive, he's doing nothing but complaining that Hux is making terrible tactical decisions that he would have made proper. And like all of his advice is great, right? He's like, no, we should be doing this. And he's like, you can see the frustration on his face. And then when they finally blow him up with the bombers, he's just like, of frickin' course. Yeah, this is how it goes. Awesome. Great. Thanks a lot, Hux. I love it. I love that character. I hope that we see more of him in some kind of prequel stuff.
One of the things about space battles that also now bother me after watching The Last Jedi is, why do we never see hyperspace weapons? They're clearly very effective. Even
Yeah.
a scaled down version of that would be able to inflict significant damage.
Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy. That was so. If we're talking about the big suicide run by Admiral Holdo, I think that was very, very lucky. I think that the fact that the hyperspace entrance point coincided with right where that giant ship was probably super lucky, right? Also, it probably only worked because that was a huge frickin' capital ship with probably giant hyperspace and would be a very expensive kind of thing. Like you couldn't just make a torpedo that does a little hyperspace jump. It would miss a lot. It probably wouldn't do a lot of damage, all that kind of stuff.
Well,
So, I mean, yes, but no.
hyperspace drives are clearly common enough you can afford to put them on small fighters.
Well,
Or
X-Wings,
program.
but TIEs don't have them.
Yeah.
So they're not that inexpensive. So I'm going to say Holdo is probably a genius hyperspace navigator or something like that. That was probably
Slash
one of her
the
traits. She might even be force sensitive.
Or just the Force helped.
Oh, totally, yeah.
general.
Yeah. I mean, because that would also explain why it did that, but then all those people were still kind of alive on the ship that's like
Yeah, it
burning and on
didn't go
fire,
right
open
through
to
Rey.
space. And yeah, right.
And all our main characters.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, if we believe Obi-Wan, there's no such thing as luck. That means it was the Force.
We celebrate a day of peace, a day of harmony.
And that has been PolitiCoast's Star Wars Holiday Special,
Stir, whip, 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 stir.
which is not the worst Star Wars Holiday Special because nothing will ever be that bad.
That one's not canon.
But it's free on YouTube if anyone wants to try and watch it.
Link not in the description.
It's like the one chip challenge. That's what it's like. It's like eating super spicy food and trying to make it through without vomiting.
what I think we can say to close off this episode is Happy Life Day to everyone.
Happy Life Day, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
The